The warm glow of the chandelier bathed the spacious living room in a festive light, casting soft shadows over the meticulously arranged decor. Michael adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, his gaze momentarily lingering on the reflection of his wife, Emma. She stood by the grand piano, laughing with a group of guests. Her laughter was effortless, her golden hair shimmering under the lights, and her elegance seemed almost unapproachable. But Michael's chest tightened. He wasn't admiring her beauty tonight. He was watching her performance. It wasn't her insistence on inviting Ethan, a work friend, that had triggered Michael's suspicions. Not at first. Emma had always been charming, a natural at navigating the complexities of their social circle. But her unusually persistent efforts to ensure Ethan's presence at this party, hosted in their own home, had unsettled Michael. He hadn't missed the way she downplayed his unease with her usual breezy dismissal. "You'll love him once you get to know him, darling." Darling. The word felt hollow now, as he watched her glance across the room. His sharp eyes followed hers and landed on Ethan, a ruggedly handsome man with a relaxed air that made him seem simultaneously out of place and entirely at home among the gathered elites. He was leaning casually against the bar, nursing a glass of wine, his eyes fixed on Emma. It wasn't just the look that unsettled Michael. It was the way Emma's lips curved slightly upward in response, the kind of smile he hadn't seen her wear for him in years. Michael's mind raced back to the past week, piecing together the subtle clues he'd noticed, the late nights Emma attributed to work, the hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, the faint but distinct scent of cologne on her scarf that wasn't his. He had wanted to confront her, but tonight's party had seemed like the perfect stage to confirm his suspicions. Now, as he observed the barely concealed glances between his wife and Ethan, he realized the confirmation was staring him in the face. Taking a steadying breath, Michael grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and stepped into the room. He greeted guests with his usual warmth, but his mind was elsewhere. Every movement, every smile Emma directed at Ethan felt like a dagger twisting in his chest. He felt a swell of anger rise, but it wasn't the time to lash out. Not yet. He caught sight of Emma and Ethan slipping away toward the hallway that led to the den. Forcing himself to stay calm, Michael followed at a discreet distance, his polished shoes silent on the hardwood floor. He didn't need to call out to them. The look they exchanged as they disappeared into the room said everything he needed to know. Tonight wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about reclaiming his dignity in the most calculated, public way possible. For now, Michael waited, his composure unbroken, the party's music thrumming faintly in the background. The storm was building, and it would break before the night was over. The den was dimly lit, illuminated only by the faint glow of a small lamp in the corner. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he pressed his ear to the closed door. Inside, muffled voices reached him, Emma's lilting tones mingled with Ethan's deeper, more confident replies. His grip on the champagne flute tightened. For a moment, he considered barging in, demanding answers on the spot. But no, that would be too easy for them. Too private. They needed to be exposed in the light, where everyone could see the betrayal for what it was. Michael leaned back from the door and walked away, his footsteps soft against the hardwood. As he made his way toward the staircase, he pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he opened the gallery app. Over the past 2 weeks, he had gathered evidence, candid photos of Emma and Ethan dining together, a snapshot of a suspiciously affectionate touch at a cafe, and a string of messages he had discreetly recovered from Emma's laptop. He swiped through the images now, each one fueling the quiet storm building inside him. This wasn't just a betrayal of love, it was an assault on his pride, his identity. He had built this life with Emma, poured his energy into ensuring they had every material comfort. And now, she was sharing it with someone else. But Michael wasn't the kind of man to let emotions consume him blindly. If they thought they could humiliate him in secret, they were mistaken. Returning to the main floor, Michael took in the party's cheerful chaos. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and guests mingled in animated conversation. To anyone looking at him, Michael appeared the perfect host, offering polite smiles and exchanging pleasantries. Inside, though, his mind was focused on one thing: execution. From across the room, Emma emerged from the hallway with Ethan trailing just behind her. She had smoothed her hair and adjusted her dress, but Michael noticed a faint flush on her cheeks. She looked radiant, as though basking in some private thrill. Ethan, on the other hand, carried himself with an arrogant ease, as though the house, the party, and everything in it belonged to him. It was that confidence, unchecked and undeserved, that solidified Michael's resolve. "Michael, there you are," Emma called as she approached him, her tone light and carefree. a veneer of normalcy. Ethan was just telling me about a fascinating new project at work. You two should talk. Michael forced a polite smile, extending his hand to Ethan, who gripped it firmly. I've been looking forward to meeting you, Michael said evenly, his voice betraying none of the fury simmering beneath. Emma speaks so highly of you. Ethan chuckled, as if completely unaware of the storm brewing. It's a pleasure. You've got a beautiful home here. You're a lucky man. Michael's smile didn't waver, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I suppose I am, he said, his words sharp as a blade, but masked in civility. But luck can be fickle, don't you think? Before either could respond, Michael turned away, his mind racing. The time for confrontation was drawing near, but it needed to be precise. He retreated to his study, locking the door behind him. Pulling out the manila envelope he had hidden in his desk, Michael carefully reviewed its contents, printed copies of the photos, text message exchanges, and screenshot hotel receipts with Emma's name. Every piece of evidence was irrefutable. As he organized the documents, a plan crystallized in his mind. The toast. It was the perfect moment. A chance to command everyone's attention and reveal the truth in a way that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. Emma had insisted on a toast earlier, wanting to thank their friends and colleagues for coming. Now, Michael would take that moment and turn it into something neither Emma nor Ethan would ever forget. He returned to the party, his expression composed, his steps deliberate. Emma caught his eye and smiled, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Michael allowed himself a small, grim smile in return. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, his voice cutting through the noise, conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to him. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Michael stood near the center of the room, his tall frame commanding attention. The soft murmur of the party faded into silence as guests turned to face him. Holding his champagne flute aloft, he exuded an air of composure that belied the tempest brewing beneath. This was his moment not of anger or rashness, but of deliberate, calculated exposure. First, let me thank all of you for coming tonight, Michael began, his voice smooth and measured. Emma and I are so fortunate to have such wonderful friends and colleagues who enrich our lives. Emma stood a few feet away, her expression radiating pride and anticipation. She had always loved these social occasions, basking in the attention and admiration of their peers. Tonight was no different, except for the storm she couldn't see gathering behind Michael's steady gaze. I wanted to take this opportunity to share something personal, Michael continued, his tone shifting subtly. Something deeply important to me. You see, over the past few weeks, I've been reflecting on the foundations of trust, love, and partnership. These are the things that sustain us, that define who we are as individuals and as couples. A ripple of curiosity passed through the crowd. Guests leaned closer, intrigued by the unexpected seriousness in his words. Emma, sensing something out of the ordinary, shifted uneasily beside Ethan, who maintained his smug air of detachment. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His movements were slow, deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. Trust is a fragile thing, he said, unfolding the paper. It's built over time, through shared experiences, mutual respect, and unwavering loyalty. And yet, it can be shattered in an instant. Emma's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing as she watched him. Michael, she interjected softly, but he held up a hand to silence her without breaking his calm demeanor. This evening, I feel compelled to share with you an example, a cautionary tale. If you will, Michael said, glancing at Emma for the briefest moment. It's a story about choices and consequences, about the masks we wear and the truths we hide. He unfolded another paper, revealing a glossy photograph. The image, illuminated by the room's bright lights, depicted Emma and Ethan embracing outside a boutique hotel. The gasps that followed were sharp, like an all wave crashing against the walls. Whispers erupted, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Emma's face drained of color. Michael, she hissed, her voice trembling. What are you doing? He ignored her, lifting another photo for all to see. This one showed the two of them walking hand in hand into a hotel room. As you can see, Michael said, addressing the stunned guests, this isn't just a story. It's real. And it's happening right here tonight. Ethan stiffened, the smugness replaced by an awkward, pale-faced unease. Now, wait a minute, he began, but Michael cut him off with a raised voice. Wait for what, Ethan? Michael asked sharply, his calm finally cracking to reveal the righteous fury beneath. Wait for more excuses, more lies, or perhaps another toast celebrating your shared deceit. The room was electric with tension. Emma's closest friends exchanged horrified glances, while others whispered among themselves, speculating how long this had been going on. A few of Michael's colleagues muttered about the audacity of bringing a lover to a party held in his home. Emma stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for Michael's arm. Please, let's talk about this in private, she whispered desperately. But Michael pulled away. No, Emma, he said firmly, his voice rising. You forfeited the right to privacy when you brought your affair into our home, into my life, and into the circle of people we once called friends. He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping over their shocked faces. For those of you who didn't know, I've spent the past several weeks uncovering the truth. This man, he gestured toward Ethan, whose face was a mask of humiliation, has been involved with my wife behind my back. And tonight, I believe, was supposed to be another chapter in their sordid little story. Ethan, finding his voice, tried to interject. You're blowing this out of proportion, Michael. It's not what you think. Michael laughed bitterly. Oh, it's exactly what I think, he said, his tone biting. I have texts, emails, photos, and even receipts, but I suppose you'd like to call this innocent fun, wouldn't you? A voice from the back of the room broke the tension. I saw them too, a guest said hesitantly, stepping forward. At the Hilton last month. I thought it was strange, but I didn't say anything. The crowd erupted again, the murmurs growing louder. Michael let the noise wash over him, a grim sense of satisfaction, filling the void left by his broken heart. This was the moment he had planned, the moment where their lies unraveled under the weight of undeniable truth. Emma's shoulders slumped, her earlier bravado shattered. Michael, I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But Michael held her gaze, his own eyes cold and unyielding. Sorry won't fix this, he said quietly, his voice laden with finality. I trusted you. I loved you. And this is how you repaid me. He set the photos down on a nearby table, the evidence of their betrayal displayed for all to see. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind him. The sound of his shoes against the floor echoed in the room, a final punctuation to the destruction of the life he once knew. As Michael stepped outside, the crisp night air hit him like a balm against his heated emotions. He paused on the front porch, his hands gripping the wooden railing as he exhaled deeply. Inside, he could still hear the muffled chaos he'd left behind, raised voices, frantic explanations, and the hum of judgment that accompanied such a scandal. The party was no longer the glittering celebration it had been mere minutes ago. It was now a battleground of whispers and fractured alliances. For a moment, Michael felt a pang of regret, not for what he had done, but for the life he had worked so hard to build, now irreparably broken. The home, the shared history, the people who had once looked at them as a model couple, it all seemed distant, like relics of a life that belonged to someone else. He straightened, steeling himself. This wasn't just about the loss. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring that Emma and Ethan faced the full weight of their actions. The door behind him creaked open. Michael turned, half expecting to see Emma rushing out in tears, begging for forgiveness. Instead, it was Linda, one of their oldest friends, her expression a mixture of sympathy and uncertainty. Michael, she said softly, stepping closer. I don't even know what to say. None of us saw this coming. Michael gave a bitter laugh. Neither did I, he replied. But here we are. Linda hesitated, glancing back toward the house. People are talking. Some of them are leaving. Others are still trying to process what just happened. Let them talk, Michael said, his voice firm. They should know the truth. If anyone here has an issue with it, they're welcome to leave. Tonight wasn't about protecting appearances, it was about exposing reality. Linda nodded, her gaze searching his face. Are you okay? I mean, really? Michael sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. No, Linda, I'm not okay. But I will be. This is just the first step. Linda placed a comforting hand on his arm before retreating into the house, leaving Michael alone once more. He turned his eyes toward the driveway, where cars were beginning to pull away, their headlights cutting through the night. Each departing vehicle felt like a chapter closing, another person taking with them their own version of what had happened tonight. Inside the house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Emma stood in the center of the living room, her tear-streaked face a pale reflection of her usual confidence. Guests avoided her gaze, their whispers punctuated by pointed glances in her direction. Ethan, on the other hand, had retreated to the far end of the room, nursing what remained of his drink, with a forced nonchalance that failed to mask his discomfort. Emma, how could you? One of her friends finally asked, her voice cutting through the uneasy quiet. You brought him here. To your own home. Did you think no one would notice? Emma's eyes darted to the speaker, but she didn't respond. What could she say? The evidence Michael had presented left no room for denial. All she could do was endure the weight of their judgment, knowing she had brought it upon herself. Ethan attempted to speak, his tone defensive. Look, This isn't anyone else's business. What happened between Emma and me is private. A scoff came from the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Private? Another voice countered. You had an affair and flaunted it in front of everyone. You made it everyone's business. Emma's closest friends began to edge away, their loyalty dissolving as they processed the betrayal. She had always been the life of the party, the magnetic presence around which their group revolved. Now she stood alone, her carefully curated image in shambles. Out on the porch, Michael heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Ethan stepping outside, his face a mix of frustration and shame. What do you want? Michael asked coldly, his posture rigid. Ethan hesitated, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. Look, I get that you're angry. I didn't mean for things to get so messy. Michael's laugh was low and humorless. Messy. Is that what you call betraying someone's trust? Sneaking around with another man's wife in his own home? Ethan held up his hands defensively. I'm not saying I didn't screw up, but all of this, he gestured toward the house. It didn't have to happen this way. Michael stepped closer, his voice steady but sharp. You're right. It didn't. It could have been avoided if you'd stayed away from my wife, but you didn't, Ethan. And now you're facing the consequences. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but Michael cut him off. Leave right now. And don't ever come back. For a moment, Ethan looked as though he might argue. But the intensity in Michael's gaze silenced him. Without another word, he turned and walked to his car, leaving Michael alone once more. As the night wore on, the last of the guests departed, their hushed voices trailing into the darkness. Emma remained inside, but Michael couldn't bring himself to re-enter the house. He leaned against the porch railing, watching the stars flicker faintly in the sky. The life he had built was gone, shattered by betrayal. But in its place, he felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't an ending, he realized. It was a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to reclaim his life on his own terms. And as the cool night wind brushed against his skin, Michael allowed himself a moment of quiet resolve. The storm had passed, and now it was time to start again. The house was eerily quiet the next morning, as though it too was grappling with the weight of what had transpired. Michael stood in the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the stillness. He stared out the window at the manicured backyard, the sight stirring memories of happier times, garden parties, family barbecues, and stolen moments of laughter with Emma. Those memories now felt like distant echoes of a life that no longer belonged to him. The events of the previous night had unfolded in his mind repeatedly as he tried to sleep. The confrontation, the fallout, and the irreversible damage to his marriage and social circle were like jagged shards, cutting deeper with every recollection. But in the stillness of the morning, a different feeling began to take root, a sense of liberation. For too long, Michael realized he had clung to the idea of perfection. A perfect home, a perfect marriage, a perfect reputation. He had spent years building a life that looked flawless on the surface, only to discover the rot festering beneath. Now, with everything laid bare, he could begin again, not as the polished host or the dutiful husband, but as himself. Upstairs, Emma sat on the edge of their bed, her eyes swollen from crying. The guilt and humiliation were overwhelming, but so too was the growing fear of what came next. She had tried to call Michael several times since the party had ended, but he hadn't answered. She knew he was still in the house, yet the silence between them felt insurmountable. Emma's phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from one of her closest friends, Sarah, a terse note of disappointment. I don't know what to say to you right now. Call me when you figure out how to apologize. Emma's fingers hovered over the screen, but she couldn't find the words to reply. It wasn't just Sarah. Several other friends had sent similarly pointed messages, and some had gone so far as to remove her from their social media. She had always been the center of her social circle, the one people gravitated toward. Now, she was an outcast, her reputation in tatters. Her thoughts turned to Ethan. But even the memory of him felt hollow now. He had left in disgrace the night before, and Emma hadn't heard from him since. It struck her that while she had thrown away everything for their affair, Ethan had never promised her anything real. He had been a thrill, a distraction, nothing more. And now she was left with nothing. Michael spent the morning sorting through paperwork in his study, determined to keep himself busy. Among the documents was the manila envelope containing the evidence he had gathered. For a moment, he considered throwing it away, but then he paused. It wasn't out of spite or lingering anger. He simply wanted to remember the lesson. Trust was precious and fragile, and he would never allow himself to ignore the signs again. By midday, Michael stepped out into the crisp winter air and drove to his lawyer's office. He had already made up his mind. There was no salvaging his marriage. The love he had once felt for Emma had been replaced by a resolute clarity. Filing for divorce wasn't just a reaction to her betrayal, it was a declaration of his intent to move forward, free from deceit. The meeting with his lawyer was straightforward. Michael outlined the terms he wanted: fairness, finality, and a clean break. There would be no drawn-out battles, no attempts to punish Emma beyond the natural consequences of her actions. He wanted to rebuild his life with as little drama as possible. In the days that followed, Michael began to reconnect with the parts of himself that had been overshadowed by his marriage. He returned to his woodworking hobby, spending hours in the garage crafting intricate furniture pieces. The rhythmic sound of saws and hammers became a form of therapy, each finished product a tangible sign of progress. He also began reaching out to friends he hadn't seen in years, people who knew him before the polished image of Michael and Emma had consumed his identity. These old friendships were a source of comfort, reminding him of the person he had been and could be again. Weeks later, as Michael sat in his newly organized study, a notification popped up on his phone. It was an email from one of his colleagues who had attended the party. The subject line read, "Admiration and support." The message was short but heartfelt. "Michael, I can't imagine how difficult that night was for you, but your composure and strength were inspiring. If there's ever anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to reach out." Michael smiled faintly, his resolve hardening. He hadn't just survived the ordeal, he had emerged stronger, more self-assured. The man who had walked out of that room was no longer the same one who had stepped into it earlier that evening. As he closed the email, Michael stood and looked out at the backyard again. This time, the view didn't evoke a sense of loss. It felt like a blank slate, ready for new memories, new beginnings, and a future that was authentically his own.